This is an interview with Dr. Chad Gestson, former principal of Camelback High School in Phoenix, Arizona. Dr. Gestson spearheaded the implementation of the school's highly successful Success is Mandatory peer tutoring program. It is said that the peer tutoring program made the largest impact in transforming Camelback High School, which had struggled for decades with the typical troubles of a failing school.
When I arrived to Camelback High School in 2009, Camelback was a struggling school academically, behaviorally, and culturally. We spent the first few years just working on systems and culture and climate on campus. And then by year 3, realized that we needed a lot more work in terms of academics for our students. And it was at that point that we decided to implement a peer tutoring program. My previous experience with tutoring was that I was actually a peer tutor while I was in college. I spent my first year of my undergraduate at a community college in Eastern Washington, where I went to play baseball, and I spent a few hours a week in the peer tutoring center at Spokane Falls Community College. Educationally, I have degrees from the University of Washington in Seattle, where I earned my bachelor's degree in English. I also have 2 master's degrees, one from Arizona State University in curriculum and instruction, and another from Northern Arizona University in educational leadership. And in 2009, I completed my doctorate of education from NAU as well. After 2 years of reform at Camelback High School, changing systems, culture, climate, and a lot of personnel, we decided to, for the first time, run a grade report. How many kids at Camelback High School were failing one or more classes? How many kids would have qualified for honor roll had we had a formal honor roll at that time? And we had a panic moment when we realized that over 1,100 of our 1,700 students at the time were failing one or more classes. The goal of the tutoring program was twofold. One, we wanted to drastically decrease the failure on our campus, but we also decided that through a peer tutoring program we could also increase the number of our students who are being successful on our campus, knowing that peer tutors often learn better when they're teaching and therefore become better students. There are 2 reasons why we decided to implement peer tutoring. One, we wanted to make sure that we used our resources appropriately. In schools today, as you know, there are a lot of budget cuts, and paying highly qualified teachers to stay after school for hours at a time is very costly, and so we really didn't have the funds necessary to run a robust after-school tutoring program. But the second reason is that we know that kids who tutor their peers, kids who teach their peers, learn their content better. Kids who tutor math become better mathematicians. Kids who tutor English become better writers. And so we wanted to also at the same time not only use our fiscal resources appropriately, but to also increase the learning of our achieving students. At the end of every quarter, a grade report is run. Every student who is failing one or more classes is assigned to a mandatory tutoring program. That program at Camelback High School is called Success is Mandatory. It's based off the idea that in high schools, failure should not be optional, but rather every kid has the potential to succeed, and therefore we should put the programs in place to ensure that they do succeed. Once kids are assigned to the program, they are assigned a certain number of hours of tutoring, mandatory tutoring hours per quarter, based on the level of failure they experienced. As an example, a kid who failed one class, maybe had multiple Ds, they will be assigned a minimum of 10 hours of tutoring per quarter. On the flip side of that, a student who's failing 3 or more classes, who's really struggling, will have upwards of 30 to even 40 hours of tutoring that is mandatory for an entire quarter. Peer tutors are primarily selected by counselors, but can also be recommended by their advisors. Peer tutors are trained in a few different ways. First of all, we start the school year with an off-campus retreat. This past year, students went up to a retreat in north central Arizona where they spent an entire weekend team building, bonding, but also receiving tutoring on how to become effective tutors. During the school year, tutors are also given instruction by teachers, primarily using AVID strategies. AVID is a program that helps and focuses on student learning for students in the middle and for students who struggle. And then we also do a lot of on-the-job training. We actually have 1 to 2 certified teachers who are in the tutoring center while tutoring is taking place, and so there's some on-the-job, job-embedded tutoring training that takes place while students are working with other students. The Camelback High School program aimed to tutor over 1,000 students, which on some hands is very ambitious. On the other hand, we felt was very necessary at Camelback. We started with big, huge tutoring centers. Believe it or not, we started in our cafeteria the first time we implemented peer tutoring, where we just put 250 kids in a cafeteria and had adults and students walking around answering questions. Realized that was way too informal. And so we eventually moved our peer tutoring program to the library and to smaller tutoring centers where we have access to textbooks, calculators, computers, and smaller groups where we then are more targeted. Even got so specific to where when a student arrives to a tutoring center now, they go sit at a math table or they sit at an English table instead of just sitting in general locations. So we learned from those original failures that it needs to be very specific, very targeted, small group, and that we have all the resources necessary to meet the needs of the students coming to get tutored. Another key learning was in the area of mathematics. A lot of students who showed up to tutoring really were there to get math help. They were doing okay in social studies, doing okay in their English classes, weren't really there because they were struggling in PE or music, but they were there because they were struggling in math. And originally, the 1 to 2 adults that we had in the room that were there to supervise were the librarian, an English teacher, and somebody other than math. And we realized that if we were going to pay to have supervision in the room, that it was important to have at least 1 math teacher in the room. Because often students would run into concepts, especially in higher level math, that even some of the peer tutors were struggling with. And so having a math teacher in the room to supervise the room was another key learning for us. There's a couple things that we do to ensure that tutoring is successful. First of all, we run very frequent grade reports. And although we realize that learning is not just about grades, that sometimes learning is, are you passing your benchmark exams or your tests at a more frequent rate? But we do track grade reports very closely to make sure that the failure rate and also the success rate of our students is either decreasing or increasing appropriately. The second thing that we do is we do a lot of surveys of students to make sure that they feel like the tutoring is being successful for them. They also fill out entry tickets and exit tickets before and after tutoring sessions to make sure that we're tracking as much data as possible to ensure success of the program. Interestingly, I think the biggest impact that the peer tutoring program had at Camelback High School was on the peer tutors themselves. We did see drastic decreases in failure rates. In fact, we went from over 1,100 kids failing to under 600 kids failing in just a semester. We cut our failure rates in half in just a semester. That was a big celebration on campus. But what we have found is that the students who are participating in the tutoring, those who take on leadership roles, take on mentoring roles, they themselves are getting more active on campus. They're more engaged in clubs and sports. We've seen the A and B rates increase on campus. We saw the honor roll rates drastically increase on campus. We've seen academic achievement increase, and we really think it's because of the peer tutors themselves who are doing the teaching, who are getting training, who are becoming more engaged. They themselves become better students, and therefore their circles of friends become better students. We've kind of seen this rising tide of academics occur at Camelback High School. Our peer tutoring program also impacted teachers. It impacted them in a couple of different ways. I think on one hand it made their life easier, on one hand it made their life a little more difficult. Difficult in that we really worked closely with teachers to make sure that peer tutors had the right materials, even had access to lesson plans for that week so that when they went to a tutoring session, they knew exactly what the teacher had taught and exactly what the teacher wanted the kids to know. And so there was some collaboration and some time that was expected between teachers and with students. On the other hand, I think it made their lives a lot easier. They had better passage rates, they had more ready students in their classroom, homework was completed at better rates, and so we saw that students came to class a lot more prepared and were a lot more successful. We were able to get a large number of our students interested in the peer tutoring program, Success is Mandatory, in a couple of different ways. One, there are just a lot of students who know that being involved in peer tutoring and leadership and mentoring opportunities is a great way to pad a resume and a personal statement for college and scholarship opportunities. So there's already a percentage of students who are looking for engaging in programs such as Success is Mandatory. The other way that we incentivize the program is that students who participated in peer tutoring received club credit. Every student at Camelback High School has to join a club or a sport. Another very important component of the peer tutoring program at Camelback High School is the lead tutor portion of that program. Not only is there a large army of tutors that show up to tutoring centers to tutor their peers, but there's also a small group between 12 to 15 students who are actually paid to run the tutoring program. They organize tutoring schedules. They recruit other peer tutors to join the program. They manage calendars. They manage resources and make sure that textbooks are handed out. They sign students in and out. It's a program completely run by students for students, and therefore we pay these top lead tutors a stipend or a scholarship that they can use for college. If I were to give one piece of advice for other schools, it would be to start somewhere and to start small. I think what we realized at Camelback High School was starting with a really big program with 1,000 students created a lot of logistical issues for us. And in hindsight, we would have started with a small number of students, probably our most struggling freshmen, pick 100, 200 of our most struggling freshmen, worked out the kinks and the cobwebs, so to speak, with a smaller number of tutors and a smaller number of tutees. And once you perfect that small number, then start to expand to a larger number, again, versus starting with a large number of students. There are a few other lessons that we learned throughout this process. One, it is extremely important to track students coming in and out of tutoring. When we first started the program, students would show up, sit anywhere they wanted. We didn't really know why they were there, what subjects they were struggling with, what homework they had, what concepts they were struggling with. And so we moved toward an entrance ticket where every student who showed up to a tutoring session not only signed in but listed what they were struggling in, what page of their textbook they were struggling with, what project they were working on, so that we could assign them a certain area, a certain table, or a certain tutor to focus on their specific areas. Resources are another important component of tutoring. When we first started the program, we didn't have textbooks, we didn't have graphing calculators, we didn't have laptops, we didn't have iPads, we didn't have Wi-Fi access. Students just showed up, expected to have paper and pencil and a textbook. And what we realized shortly thereafter was that students who are failing are often ill-prepared, not only for class but for tutoring sessions. And so we had to create an expectation, but also match that with the resources necessary to provide appropriate tutoring. And so what we found, once we brought in textbooks, we brought in laptops, had a set a number of graphing calculators that could be checked out. Kids were forced to be prepared because we had the resources there, and then after that the tutoring became a lot more effective. We would absolutely recommend this peer tutoring program to other high schools. For one, it drastically increases and improves and engages the upper level students on your campus, those who get involved in the peer tutoring. They become better leaders, they become better students, they become better people through their leadership and their tutoring and their academics that take place inside that tutoring center. We also would recommend it because it does have a direct impact on learning and grades for the struggling students. That peer-to-peer interaction is so positive and so impacting. That level of connection that teachers don't necessarily have with struggling students can be attained through peers. Often a student shows up to a classroom, 34 kids, gets taught a lesson, doesn't get that lesson, doesn't really have a chance to get any one-on-one with that adult, but then they meet with a peer that's been in that seat, that understands that from a teenage perspective, how to understand a certain concept, how to get over a certain problem, and that level of connection between students, I believe, is priceless.